Hey guys, this is Mayleek. This is the podcast. Today, I am excited to be joined by someone who has been a true inspiration to me and an inspiration in both the mental health and business spaces. It has been a while since we last connected, but I couldn't be more excited to have Dr. Joy from Therapy for Black Girls here with us today. As many of you know, I am a huge advocate for therapy and mental wellness, but today we're going to be diving into a different side of Dr. Joy, the powerhouse entrepreneur behind this incredible movement. We are going to explore the journey of how Therapy for Black Girls grew from a simple idea into a thriving business that has made a real impact in the world. Dr. Joy will share her early days, the unexpected challenges, and how she knew it was time to take her passion to the next level. So, whether you're here for the mental health insights, because there will be some of those, or the entrepreneurial wisdom, this conversation is one you don't want to miss. Let's get to it. Okay, it has been a really long time since I have spoken to you. Dr. Joy, Therapy for Black Girls, and everyone knows I love a good therapy conversation, but we are here today to talk to you about the business boss that you are. So, I mean, I feel like I remember the super early days of Therapy for Black Girls, but Dr. Joy, tell us what made you even decide to strike out and try something like this?
So that would imply that it was like an intentional kind of thing, which it absolutely was not.
Really?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. So I started Therapy for Black Girls. So I think some people know this part of my story, but I was the director of the counseling center at Clark Atlanta when Therapy for Black Girls got started. But I also had a part-time private practice, as I had for much of my career before Therapy for Black Girls. And so, just throughout that work and my work in college counseling centers, like the conversations around Black women and mental health and like the stigma, it felt like there needed to be a place for that. So I started Therapy for Black Girls after watching Black Girls Rock, the award show on BET in 2014. Like, it just was such an incredible, like, you could feel it through the screen. And I've still never been to like a one in person. I can't wait to be there at some point. But you could feel it through the screen, like the energy and like the love and Black women just kind of coming together. And I was like, wow, it would be really cool to try to do something like this for Black women as it relates to mental health. And so I bought the domain and started blogging on therapyforblackgirls.com. Just about like how to find a therapist, how do you lean into your support system, those kinds of things. And it did not start as a business. Like, it just started as an additional resource for Black women and girls to have around mental health. So I did not go into it thinking, okay, this is going to be my full-time thing. Like, it just kind of happened.
Okay. And so you get started on, I feel like I love these stories because you start something off just because you see a need. This is a good idea. What was the shift? Like, how did you know it was time for you to do this more seriously?
So, we started in Therapy for Black Girls in 2014, but I added the podcast and the directory in 2017. And I think that is what indicated to me like, oh, this is something that I can't manage and still do my other full-time job. And I think it was really like the press inquiries and like the rate at which therapists were signing up for the directory. It just became too much to manage on my own. I don't have a tech background. And so I was putting a lot of like effort into like finding these contractors and freelancers to try to manage the website for me. And so it became very clear that like I'm going to have to pivot and it felt like, okay, this is really something that people are excited about. So I owe it to myself to try and see if this is something that can become a full-time thing.
Got it. Now, what were the hurdles, Dr. Joy? I mean, this sounds like an amazing, bright idea, but what did you run into? What got you like, no, I didn't?
Yeah. So, I mean, I also acknowledge like the privilege that came with being able to take that leap was because my husband was still full-time employed at AT&T at the time. And so I knew that I didn't have to worry about health insurance or salary. Like, we were able to make things work just with his salary. And so, but the main hurdle to me was the technology. still.
Yeah.
Because if you are someone with, and you know this, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
if you're not a person with like a tech background, like I didn't even know which questions to ask. Like I didn't even know who I was looking for to help me build the website. So I was on all of these, thankfully for like all of these freelance platforms like Upwork. And so I was finding like all of these like WordPress developers, but they weren't in the US. Like, so they were in, I think I had somebody from Romania. I had a team in India. So the technology was a barrier, but also they are in very, very different time zones. And so I would be up until like 2 or 3 in the morning trying to have meetings with these people to try to like help figure out what was going on with the website. So that was the biggest barrier.
The tech hurdle, yes, it's very like, okay, I have this great idea, which, this is a directory, this is very helpful, but this is not something you can go on like Wix or something and build. It's not an easy sort of blog platform. What I'm curious about, Dr. Joy, is your audience. You have such a massive audience. What were some of the things that you feel worked in terms of like building such a broad audience?
So I think the timing was a very large part of it. So, I think now we see mental health conversations kind of all over the place. But I think in 2014, we were still kind of dipping our toe into having these conversations, at least more publicly, right? And so I remember very vividly, like I had gone to this blogging workshop and I was just starting therapy for Black girls. And like the response in that room also let me know like, oh, Black girls are ready to go here. Like people were like, oh, that's such a good idea. We don't have this. And so I think the timing was a very large part of it. And, you also know this because of your businesses, like Black women are fiercely loyal if they feel like you are riding for them. And so, we have like gotten a marketing plan more together now, but in the very early stages, it was very much just word of mouth, like people just enjoying the podcast and then sharing it in their group chat or sharing it with their aunties and cousins, or finding a therapist in the directory and then telling everybody about it. Like, oh, you got to check out this resource. And so Black women have been our largest cheerleaders then and now, and just helping us to get the word out.
Yeah. Before I keep going in this business, a question's coming up for me that I'm super curious about. You have done lots and lots of podcasts, and I feel like I was keeping up with you, and then I got pregnant. So that's why I'm like, 2018, I had my first child. And so I follow you on the socials and I always see the tweets, and I'm like, there are some of these topics in some of these podcasts that I'm like, yes. What is the most popular sort of topic that people inquire about as it relates to therapy for Black girls?
Ooh.
I'm curious. What do we want to know? Or is there an episode that just doesn't die?
So I think there's one about like the superwoman syndrome that like people continue to go back to, right? Because I think that is foundational when you think about like the struggles Black women have with like protecting our time and our energy. That is something that comes up a lot. But very interestingly enough, every time we do an astrology episode, those are the ones.
That is there. It's so it's so interesting because when I do my podcast, there will be things that there will be like the podcasts that are more like publicly popular. And then there are the podcasts that I can see in the background that are really popular, and like anything talking about sex, any version Goody Howard, I don't know if you know her, but
she's been on the podcast several times.
Yes. Anytime Goody gets to entertaining, it's like you can always know that it's going to be a good time. But I always find like I get like no repost. Nobody tags me, but the numbers tell me you're texting it, you're sharing it.
Yep.
And you want to talk about this. Okay. So I feel like there has been an evolution of therapy for Black girls. How has this business evolved over time? You started off with you said you had the podcast and the directory. Yes. And how has it evolved? Because I feel like you're doing like majorly big things. I see you all the time. I'm like, just know that I'm always rooting for you, even if I'm like making bottles or changing diapers.
Right. When life starts to life.
Yeah. So how has it, not just for the business, but for you as a helper, healer, therapist, I get so curious about how you guys go from sort of these like rooms where you really are there to listen and be there for people to like, now it's action. It's camera time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think the largest evolution has been the team in the business, right? So it very much started as like me and just my brain thinking of like, what topic are we going to talk about? My husband, I guess, was the first unofficial team member because he was editing the podcast.
Okay.
But you know, now I have like a team of 4 producers and 2 community managers and a social media person and a graphic designer. Like there are all of these people that I think just have made the business so much richer, and like we bring all of our brains together and can really tap into like, I feel like a wider spectrum of what kinds of things Black women want to hear and talk about. So I think the team has really been the kind of changing point for the business. But I think for me personally, therapy has been the thing that has been most helpful in me transitioning.
Wow.
Because, to your point, like much of our training as psychologists is very in the background. Like you're working with maybe one other person or maybe a group, but it's still very much about the client and not you. And so this version of the business, as you talked about, like has really required me to kind of be more in the forefront. I was already doing a little bit of public speaking, but not nearly to the levels that I'm doing now, and have had to become more comfortable with being like the face of this brand, which is not something that I at all set out to do.
I want to talk about that because that's one of the big topics. You know, people reach out to me and it's just like, what does that feel like? You know, it's like, what is their discomfort? What are some things that are going through your head when you're going to do something big?
Yeah, it feels very uncomfortable. And I spend a lot of time in my therapy sessions, I think, preparing for those kinds of things. And, you know, honestly, Malik, what really challenged me and what my therapist and I have spent a lot of time talking about is still wanting to be this like in the background, like I want to be of service. I want to like share my knowledge in this way, but that is not reality anymore. Right. And so my therapist has done a lot of challenging with me. Like, you keep wanting to be like this unassuming, not public figure when you very much are a public figure. Like, people are recognizing you. Like, you can't, you know, so I know you wish for things to be a little more discreet, but that's not your actual reality anymore. And so what kinds of systems do I need to have in place to be able to kind of continue to do this work? Because the work is really important to me, but also protecting myself and like my mental health and my family is also really important. So we've had conversations around like, you know, do I need security in certain places, or like what kinds of things happen? Like, you know, I feel like I'm more okay to be on if I'm just by myself, but like when the kids are with me, then that feels a little different, you know. So different kinds of things that I just didn't imagine I would have to think about, I now have to think about as a more public figure.
Yeah, it'll rock your world, you know.
Yes.
I think I've shared, I didn't even have a therapist until I went from like having this idea for a brand, and then it exploded literally, you know, overnight. And then all of a sudden I don't know how to operate in this space, and just the way that other people start to interact with you. I'm like, this is not all in my mind. Have you noticed some of that? Has anybody come out of the woodworks of like, they knew you back when you were just at the job and now you're an author, you're a business boss? How do you engage with people treating you differently?
I don't know that there has been.
Oh, lucky you.
Yeah, I don't think that there's been so much difference because I don't think I was like dabbling in between both worlds. And so like the people who I knew before are like my close girlfriends who I'm still just Joy. Right. So I feel like there wasn't very much of a footprint of like people knowing me before and now later. So I have, you know, knock on wood, thankfully not run into very much of the like, oh, I knew you then and now I treat you differently. But I do think I think that there is sometimes an expectation, because I am a therapist, that sometimes people hear me on the podcast, they read the book, and so they do want to, I think, become a little more disclosing on first meeting. Then, you know, of course they wouldn't do that just naturally, right? And so I do feel like, okay, I got to be like careful of that, because of course I want people to feel comfortable or whatever, but I also don't want you to, you know, be pouring your soul out in the middle of Hartsfield, Atlanta. Like we don't want to do that. Yeah, so I think that has probably been the biggest difference for me.
Right. Yes.
Yeah.
So the conversations that are being had amongst, many of the entrepreneurs that I know has been the team part of it. So I know there are people on your team editing this podcast, but we're not talking about you guys. But I'm curious to know what, even if it's not you, what are some of the conversations that you're hearing that Black women entrepreneurs are having as it relates to team building? And if you aren't, I'm happy to share.
Yes. So I think that the conversation that it feels like I'm often having with like my other entrepreneur friends and colleagues is around like the psychology of your team, right? Because I think many of us go into it knowing that you have to have general guidelines around like tardiness and like showing up, like the basics. But I don't think many of us understood how much kind of people managing is actually involved in managing a team.
Yes, I wanted to scream out, bro. Like what?
Yeah, so anything that people are dealing with personally will often show up in the workspace. And I think, I think many of us have been wanting to like build different kinds of spaces and like not recreate the trauma that maybe we've experienced in like Fortune 500 companies or predominantly white kinds of companies. And so I think we kind of go into it more heart-centered, which sometimes can be, I think, a downfall, because then, people maybe feel more encouraged to share more than they would maybe in a different kind of workspace, which feels difficult to navigate sometimes.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head, just a little bit more heart-centered. And I think, like, have you seen anybody doing it well? And if so, what do you think they have in place,
So I think I've been looking to Lovey for a lot of this, and I know you are also very close to Lovey. And what she's been doing on her podcast this season, I think, is just incredible, because I think it is kind of taking the curtain back and letting people see like there are all these conversations that we do really need to be having in entrepreneurship. And so one of the things that I've really appreciated about what she's shared both on the podcast and just in conversations with her is the level of consultation and like other people that she's brought in, right? Because I think again, many of us, we didn't go to school necessarily for human resources, so we don't know a lot about like managing a team, but there are people that do know that, right? And so you can bring them in to help you develop leadership skills and to figure out how to navigate tricky situations in your business.
Yeah, I think that's the difficult part, is like you have this idea, so many of us, and then going from a solopreneur, just a company of one, to building a team, not knowing what you don't know. So even if you hire somebody, a consultant to come in, and how do you even know that they know what they're doing? And so it becomes, what I understand, I haven't had the chance to fully tap into Lovey's podcast, but what I understand is just like money's spent, it is very expensive to learn, and I think that's been tricky. Besides the tech parts and sort of you stepping out to the front, have there been any other challenges that you weren't expecting as it relates to this business? Anything else that stick out for you?
I think I was not, I'm somebody who I think has always been very like leery of like money conversations. Okay. And so I feel like, again, I did not step into this intending to build a business. So when I just had like a part-time private practice, it was like, okay, that goes into the household pot, whatever. But now there's like this whole business that like supports other people's families. And so I've had to get much more granular with money conversations and like, okay, this is how much revenue the business has to have to sustain this team. And like, how do we make goals? And like all of those things that are really not like my lane of genius. And so thankfully, I've been able to find an incredible bookkeeper and an accountant who really helped me to kind of feel less anxious about that. But I think that has also been a challenge too, like just getting comfortable with like, okay, this is what the business has to be doing for the team to be able to continue in the way that you want it to.
That's so important, because, you can get these like blips of checks, and it's just, was there a boom for therapy for Black girls during the pandemic? would you say?
Absolutely, yeah, because there was much more request for public speaking, right? Like more speaking engagements for me to, come and talk to businesses about managing mental health. Definitely that kind of thing. Mm-hmm.
I'm so curious to know what I feel like. Back in the day when I first started talking about therapy, I think 2012, and I remember just thinking like, why aren't more people talking about this? I remember one of my early therapy sessions being like, I swear to God, I said this. I was like, if Mary J. Blige said she was like doing that, like, I was like, so I was just thinking about all the songs I listened to. She came to me because I was like, oh my God. Once the sort of awareness, I came into awareness with the work of therapy. I'm like, all the stuff I was singing, all of a sudden, it's just like, now I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to sing
that. What is this? Right.
What is this? And I guess I just, now I feel like the stigma has definitely kind of like gone away some, would you say?
Yeah, I would say it's
decreased, but I'm wondering, is there a trend? Is there something that you're seeing now, 2024, that's different than when you first started?
Ooh, I mean, well, we have been through a whole pandemic, right? And that's not completely done, right? Whatever stage of this pandemic we are in.
Right. It's important. I feel like it's important to say that.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So I think that has changed everything in my mind in terms of the mental health landscape. One, therapists, I think, are feeling much more tapped out because I think it is in our nature, I think, as helpers, as healers, to kind of rush into the fire, right? Like, let's help save. And I think that's what many of us did in the pandemic, right? Like, and even for myself, it's our time. Like, they need us, right? And I think even for myself, like, it felt okay to, like, take on more speaking engagements because I wasn't traveling. And so it's like, oh, I can just do this from my bedroom. Like, I don't even have to, like, get fully dressed. And so, of course, I can do all this scheduling. Right. Yes. And you don't realize, like, the toll and the energy it takes to just be on and like holding this stuff for other people. And so I think a lot of therapists are feeling very burnt out, a little crispy on the edges, as I like to call it.
I think I saw, did you have that already where you had something for therapists?
It was just this past weekend. Yeah.
Okay. Yes. I was like I said, I keep up and I was like, yes, that sounds right. So the therapists are crispy.
Therapists are really tired. And I think, just because as a nation, as a society, I don't think we do well with like loss and grief and like so much of the pandemic actually was an exercise in loss and grief that has not gone acknowledged. And so I think people are feeling very tapped out, but not sure why. They're not necessarily connecting it to all the losses and all the things that like just got upended throughout the pandemic. And so I think we still haven't really seen the toll that the pandemic has taken on us mental health wise. And I think the fallout is coming.
Dang. So any glimmer hints into what fallout could look like? Like, what do you think might happen?
Well, I think we're already starting to see like some of the irritability, right? Like, so when you see like these like fights on airplanes or like these random like public outbursts kinds of things, I think that is like grief that has not been processed and like people just not connecting with all of that. I also think like the apathy and like the checking out that many people are doing, I think is also directly connected to like a pandemic after effect that they are not sure or how to connect with.
That's so helpful to know. You know, it's like we were sitting here this weekend and I was like, we didn't go nowhere. I was we still acting like we're in the pandemic because it is just, we used to whine and complain during that time. And now it's like, meh, we'll just hang out at home.
Yeah. And everything became so much more complicated. Like I always found travel to be like not the easiest of experiences, but I think definitely now it all feels so much more like cumbersome.
Yeah, right. It's not good. This is helpful. Okay. So segueing a little bit, since we have you, in terms of therapy for those who are feeling burned out, because I feel like that's a lot of us. What are some tips, tidbits? The therapists are burned out, but I think it's all of us.
It is all of us.
What are some ways that we can recover, if that's possible.
Yeah. So I think the first step really is just acknowledging that to both yourself and other people. Like, I think it was amazing to see this weekend when the therapists were in person, but I think this happens in smaller circles all the time. Like, one person will say something and then it's like, oh my gosh, me too. Right?
Yeah.
And then again, I think that's what Lovey has been doing on her podcast. Like, that's why there's been so much outpouring of entrepreneurs. Like, oh my gosh, I wasn't the only one struggling in this way. Yes. So I think just acknowledging to yourself.
Sometimes we feel alone with our problems, and then you say one thing, it's like, and then everybody's like, yeah, me too.
Yeah, of course. Right. Okay. And that is what allows, like, I think all of us to kind of tap into one another as a source of support, because that silence is really where the shame kind of continues to fester. Right. Like, oh, I'm really embarrassed that I don't know what to do in my business, or I didn't have the answers. Right. But when it becomes more public, then the shame kind of goes away as well, which lets you move forward differently than if you were just keeping it to yourself. So I think the first step is acknowledging it to yourself and to others, and then continuing to talk about it and continuing to, like, seek out support. So whether that be with a therapist or some kind of coach or a spiritual leader, like looking for someone to help you to kind of walk through what it is that you're feeling like you're struggling with.
That's so helpful. And because, like I said, I have you. For those that maybe are still on the fence about therapy, what do you think therapy for Black girls has helped? You know, how do you all help in this way? Because yeah, sure, the stigma is done for a good amount, but it's still there.
It's still very much there. Yes.
Yeah. I'll go if I need it.
Yes, very much. And I think that is the role that Therapy for Black Girls has done a beautiful job with, is making it okay to talk about all kinds of different things with a therapist. Like, I'm proud of how we have introduced, like, there really is no thing that you could not talk with a therapist about. And so we have a variety of different conversations with different kinds of therapists who practice in different ways.
Yes.
And so I think it is important for people to know that therapy doesn't have to look just one way, and you don't only have to go in an emergency. Right? Like, there are all these great things that you could be working on even before an emergency happens.
What's one of the kind of, like, uncommon therapist or modalities that maybe even is a little bit of a, I don't want to say surprise, but just like you, even as a practitioner, is like, I didn't know they had therapy for that. Is there something that you know of?
Yeah, so I will say I have two answers. So EMDR, I think, is a therapy modality that we've done an episode on, but I've been seeing more conversations around, especially for people who have experienced trauma in some way. And so it is less talking, though there is still some talking involved in EMDR therapy, but it uses, like, this light apparatus that like the therapist is controlling, like, these lights to help you reprocess the experience of trauma that then allows your brain to heal, which is just fascinating. So I feel like that was something that I knew a little bit about, that I have learned more about, and I'm hearing more people talk very positively about.
Me too.
Yeah, the impact that has had.
I have learned about EMDR through other people, you know, over lunch, someone saying, I felt like talk therapy wasn't working for me. So my therapist suggested I try this. And I'm like, well, what is that? You know? And just them feeling like it was sort of that booster next level. So, the modality EMDR, what is something that people probably don't know they can talk to a therapist about?
I think sex.
Give us some topics.
So one, I think, like, differences in libido. So maybe you are more interested in sex and your partner is less interested. Like, that is something to talk with a therapist about. I think also pain during intercourse, you know, so I think most people would think, like, oh, I'm going to check with my OBGYN about this. And you definitely should. And so sometimes there is a physical concern, but sometimes there is a mental health concern that is actually making sex difficult and less pleasurable. And so that is also something I think that you could talk with a therapist about, but not just any therapist. I do want to add that caveat because that has come up, right? I think a lot of us are trained generally in things, but I have learned that you can do a lot of damage to people. I think especially in cases like this, if you are not, like, trained as a sex therapist, to be able to have the certain kinds of conversations and offer the kinds of interventions that actually would be helpful to people.
Right. And so in that case, it's like, do you have someone you recommend, you know, and that type, is it, because I am talking to a sex therapist, is it just like a licensed sex therapist?
So there's a certification called ASECT. I think it stands for the American Association of Sexuality Educators and Trainers, or I think it's AASECT. And I think that is the one in the field, like that's the credential in the field that it feels like is most, like safe and like vetted, and, people have done like a lot of training to get this qualification for themselves.
I appreciate that because that's helpful. So before we get out of here, I just want to know for those who have a good idea and are afraid, because you could have just had this idea and maybe it didn't work, or maybe people didn't love it. And so for those who have good ideas and are on the fence about trying them, do you have some advice for that person?
Oh, I would say start with what you have, and then take the next steps. Like, I think a lot of times people get stuck because they think they have to like invest a lot of resources in an idea to get it off the ground. But Therapy for Black Girls started as a Google Doc with my husband editing on our like home computer. So
right. You're like, that was the extent of it.
That was the extent of it, right? And so I think start with the resources that are available to you that are low cost or no cost to try the idea out to see if it is something that people are excited about. And if it is, and people are willing to pay you for it, then you can invest resources. But I discourage people from putting a whole bunch of their own money out into something if you're not sure it's going to work yet, when there are so many resources where you could start for free.
Okay. And then my next question is, for the person who doesn't particularly love being out front, I know a lot of people who don't want to start businesses because they don't, they're like, I don't want to share. I'm just not, I have someone that I mentor. She's like, I just don't like sharing.
Sharing themselves, you mean?
She doesn't like, I don't like sharing myself. I love sharing my work, but I don't, she feels like there's an element of this that requires a personal, people need to know you as a person. And I feel like some people think that that's necessary.
Yes.
But for somebody who's not maybe comfortable being out front, what would you say to that person?
Yeah, I feel like I'm also in that camp. Like, I don't really want to be talking about like what I'm having for dinner or where the kids are. Like, I do feel like there is an element that I still want to protect, but I do think that I do enough publicly where people can still share things, right? So you could share clips of you at speaking engagements. You could share clips of you thinking about what the next podcast episode, or, so I think that there's a way to offer yourself personally without it feeling too involved and like you're like kind of invading safe spaces. Like, there's a way to let people know who you are without having to divulge more than you are comfortable with, I think.
So helpful. Okay. So tell us what you have, tell us about the book, and tell us what we can expect to see from Therapy for Black Girls. Yeah.
So, that was the other part that I think threw the business into a tailspin, is that I came out with the book last year.
You're like, just hold on,
put everything else on hold, girls. We are going on a book tour.
Yeah, because I got time. Right?
Right. I got plenty of time. Let's just throw a book tour on top of it.
You gotta love us,
You got to love us.
It's exciting, though. It's like, it's exciting to do these things, even though you don't have time to do these things.
You don't have time to do it. Yes, which is why I've had conversations in the business like, y'all, please hold me accountable to coming up with these grand ideas anymore, y'all, because we can't. Like, I think the thing is that we often are so successful with them that it feels like, oh, this was easy, and you forget how much stress and strain it actually put on you and the teams to do these things.
Yes.
Yes.
My bad habit is it's like, as soon as I see a pocket of free time, I'm like,
how can I fit it?
I could do this, instead of just like letting it be
sitting
free
chill.
time.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, we need the free time.
Yeah. I look at it as windows for my ideas.
Yes. And they could be, or they could just be times for you to just lay down and like read a good book for yourself.
I know. Tell us a little bit about your book, because I still want people to check out your book.
Yes. So the book is called Sisterhood Heals, The Transformative Power of Healing in Community, which I think, again, we've already talked a little bit about, but I really feel like so much of the work of Therapy for Black Girls is based on the foundation of sisterhood and like Black women having these conversations, being transparent with one another, and really holding space for one another. And I think, the timing feels very apropos right now, because I think in the pandemic and even across these next couple of months and years, I think the only way we are going to get through a lot of what is happening is together. And I think Black women have always done a really good job of that. And so Sisterhood Heals is both a celebration of who we are as Black women to one another, another, but also an invitation for how we can do a better job of supporting one another and really dismantling some of these systems that are invested in us not actually leaning on one another.
Wow.
Yes.
What is a system? What would be a system that you think is, puts that between us?
Yeah. So I think patriarchy is huge, right? So this idea that there's only one black girl in the office who can be successful. Right. So then that has you looking at the other sister like, okay, girl, it's me or you. So I got to protect myself, right? As opposed to, no, we are going to force the system and I'm going to keep the door open behind me. And so I think that is one of the ways that it shows up a lot is in our workspaces in this idea that only one person can be successful.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I say that as someone who's not had a lot of formal jobs,
So. But you know about it.
I know about it, and I know what that feels like. Where I remember it's like I had one internship, and I was like, "Oh, I can't do this," know. And so I knew very early, like, I'm not cut out for this. Okay, so we have your book, Sisterhood Heals, and what else is Dr. Joy working on?
Yeah, so like I said, we just wrapped up our first therapist in-person event this weekend in Atlanta.
Necessary.
Yeah, and they, of course, are asking for a next one. So we will get busy planning.
Yeah, you're supposed to drop that on the last day.
On the last day, I know. We're not that far ahead, y'all. We're not. We're not that far ahead, but we will get busy planning it because it was an incredible time, and I do see even more now how necessary it is for a therapist to have a space where they can kind of come and unwind and like talk with other people about how they're doing and different kinds of things they're doing in their practices. So we will be planning the next one for next year.
Okay, and I feel like I want to let you go, but I just got to ask one more question.
Yes, of course.
What can you tell us? Why is therapy so expensive? I feel like you told me you were just with these therapists. It feels like it's expensive, but like it's a business. So do you know why? Because I've seen the prices go up.
Yes. I think for a lot of reasons. So, most therapists, if you're meeting with them in person, like they are renting or have a mortgage for an office space. We are paying for like malpractice insurance and liability insurance.
Wow.
We have to have yearly continuing education credits to keep our licenses up to date. Most people have like biannual. So every 2 years, like I have to pay for my license to be renewed. So that is a cost. The cost of like your social media presence and like your telephone and like website. And, like it's very much a business. And if you accept insurance, then if you don't want to be the one on the phone with insurance, then you're also paying like a team. It's a nightmare. It's a complete
You have to have a person that you pay.
You have to have a person to pay. Yes, to chase down your claims. Yeah. So I think most therapists want to keep therapy as affordable as they can and also support their families, right? Like, and I think we often think about, I think this is where therapists I think have done themselves a disservice in kind of making it look so easy, right? And on the outside, it just looks like you're talking, but we're actually highly trained professionals. And so, you're getting specialist care. And so I do understand, but I think, again, this is one of those systems that has pit therapists against clients as opposed to these systems that are making it difficult for therapists to show up and do their work and take care of themselves and their families. So, I think
this is for real the last one. I think the hardest part is understanding the process of therapy. I don't know how you guys could do that, but I think it's really difficult for someone to be like, okay, I'm paying money, but I don't even know how this works, And I don't know if it's like we can't tell you because of this, or maybe, because I know that it's a part of like the process. But do you think it would be okay if therapists explained a little bit more, like there was a little less mystery, about it?
Yes. I think it's difficult because it depends on how you practice, right? Like, so I think for something like EMDR, I think a therapist could say, okay, typically in 6 to 8 sessions, like I see this level of resolving. But for a therapist who practice like the way that I practice is much more interpersonal, and it is more about you and I developing a relationship so that I can see how you're showing up in other relationships in your life. And so I can't really tell you like we can do that in 12 sessions, right? And so I think it depends on what you're coming in for, the kind of therapist you're looking for, and how that therapist practices may be able to give you a little bit more of indication of like how many sessions you need, so to speak. But that's not always really easy to do.
Yeah. And I think you really just answered my question, because you said this is interpersonal. So I need to see this or that. And this, therefore this is not I don't know if it'll be 3 or 30 or
right. 300.
Keeping it a buck.
Yeah. But I think the truth is, though, you can always make a decision, right? Like if you feel like, you know what, this has been helpful, but I don't know that I can afford this anymore, you can definitely talk with your therapist about that to see if they have any sliding scale options for you, or if you can switch to like maybe every other week. Like most therapists want to work with you if you've developed a good relationship. And so I think telling your therapist like, hey, I'm really struggling, I don't know if I can continue to afford this, can help you to maybe work through something that could be helpful, where you maybe don't have to completely discontinue, but could do something maybe that's more affordable.
Yes. And I feel like you need therapy to be able to learn how to do
to say that. Very true. That is the case sometimes.
Right. Yeah. To have the guts to say something like that.
Yeah. So. See, I love that you asked that question, because I think that is also a beautiful byproduct of therapy, is that you can have conversations with like authority figures in a way that maybe feels uncomfortable in other places. Like, we really want you to disagree with us and tell us when we were wrong, because that means then you can do that in other spaces as well. So I think that that's really important. It's an important skill.
Completely. And I think that's the thing. This is the part that I feel like is so tricky about explaining therapy, is because that is something that you can learn how to do, and you don't even realize when it wasn't like a specific point that you learned how to do it.
Yep.
And just having the guts to be like, girl, I don't know if I can afford this.
Yeah.
That's a skill that some of us just don't have. Instead, we spend too much money because we're too ashamed to say. And so I could talk to you all the time and forever. So therapy is always one of my top topics. Black women are my muse. Thank you for your time and for being so candid with us about the business. I know you have our support. Thank you. But if there's anything you need, don't hesitate. And what do you want to send us home with? Where can we find you?
Yes, you can find me at Hello Dr. Joy across all the social media platforms. You can grab your copy of Sisterhood Heals at sisterhoodheals.com, and then check out everything we have going on at therapyforblackgirls.com.
We will. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Miley.